Before the interstate highway system made everywhere look the same, American roads were lined with things that existed purely to make drivers slow down and spend money. Giant fiberglass animals, mystery spots, roadside zoos, reptile farms, and novelty structures that made no apologies for existing. Most of them are gone now, and the ones that remain are either nostalgic curiosities or punchlines. These are the 15 forgotten roadside attractions that completely disappeared. Number 15. Dogpatch USA, Marble Falls, Arkansas. Dogpatch USA was a theme park in the Ozark Mountains of northern Arkansas, built around the characters and setting of Al Capp's Lil Abner comic strip, which ran from 1934 through 1977. The park opened in 1968 in Marble Falls, Arkansas, a location chosen for its Ozark scenery, which was considered compatible with the hillbilly Appalachian setting of the comic strip. At its best, Dogpatch USA offered rides, live entertainment, crafts demonstrations, and character appearances by the Lil Abner cast, all set in a park designed to evoke the fictional Dogpatch, Kentucky. The park ran into a fundamental problem that no amount of ride maintenance could fix. Its entire identity was tied to a comic strip that most of its younger visitors had never read, and most of its older visitors had stopped reading. Lil Abner's cultural relevance was already declining when the park opened, and the strip ended in 1977, removing even the nominal connection to a living property. The park limped through the 1980s with declining attendance, ownership changes, and the general condition of an attraction whose concept had outlived its cultural moment. Dogpatch USA closed permanently in 1993. The site sat abandoned for years, the buildings, rides, and infrastructure slowly surrendering to the Arkansas weather until portions were demolished and others fell on their own. The Ozark natural landscape the park was built into has been gradually reclaiming the site. What remains of the physical structures attracts the specific type of visitor who enjoys exploring abandoned places, not the families who were the original target audience. Number 14. Prehistoric Forest, Irish Hills, Michigan. The Prehistoric Forest was a roadside attraction in the Irish Hills area of southeastern Michigan along US Highway 12 that offered visitors a walkthrough experience featuring life-sized concrete and fiberglass dinosaur sculptures in a forested setting. It operated for decades as one of the more elaborate entries in the roadside dinosaur attraction genre, a genre that was, in the mid-20th century, surprisingly competitive, with variations appearing across multiple states on major travel routes. The specific draw of the Prehistoric Forest was the combination of the wooded setting, which provided genuine atmosphere, and the scale and variety of the dinosaur sculptures, which included species ranging from small raptors to full-size Tyrannosaurus and Brontosaurus reconstruction in poses that reflected the scientific understanding of dinosaur posture and behavior available at the time, which is to say, mostly wrong by current paleontological standards, but dramatically impressive in the roadside attraction context. The attraction eventually closed, and the property passed through ownership changes. The fiberglass and concrete dinosaur sculptures, the kind of objects that are difficult to dispose of, too large to easily move, and too distinctive to repurpose, remained on the property in various states of weathering and structural failure. The Prehistoric Forest site became a minor landmark of a specific kind, an attraction that closed and then became famous for being closed, attracting visitors interested in the abandoned sculptures as much as the operational attraction ever attracted visitors for the intended purpose. Number 13. Fort Fun, Gatlinburg, Tennessee. Various. The roadside attraction economy of Gatlinburg and the Pigeon Forge corridor in eastern Tennessee generated and consumed attractions at a rate that makes tracking any individual a challenge. The area along US 441 through the Smoky Mountains Gateway communities produced and has destroyed dozens of miniature golf courses, go-kart tracks, novelty museums, wax museums, and entertainment venues over the 1970s through 1990s period. Fort Fun was one example among many, a Western-themed amusement complex that offered rides, games, and Western-style entertainment typical of its era. The Western theme parks that operated along this route operated during the period when Westerns were commercially reliable with American family audiences and faded as those themes lost cultural currency. The Gatlinburg corridor itself has not disappeared. The Smoky Mountains remain a major tourist destination, and the strip connecting Pigeon Forge to Gatlinburg has become more densely developed over time. What disappeared is the specific variety of attraction, the independently owned, Western-themed, cash economy roadside park that couldn't compete with the Dollywood-scale investment that eventually defined the regional entertainment product. Number 12. Santa's Land, Cherokee, North Carolina. Santa's Land was a theme park in Cherokee, North Carolina, adjacent to the Great Smoky Mountains National Park, that operated on a Christmas theme year-round. The park opened in 1966 and offered the combination of Santa Claus-themed attractions, petting zoo animals, a small amusement park component, and the novelty of encountering Christmas-themed entertainment in the mountains of western North Carolina, regardless of what month the calendar showed. The year-round Christmas theme was a business model that had more theoretical appeal than practical durability. Christmas theming works well in December, adequately in November, and requires increasingly aggressive suspension of disbelief as the calendar approaches July. The park operated for decades by relying on the novelty factor and the family audience traveling to or from the Smoky Mountains. But the business case weakened as the novelty wore off, and as competing attractions in the region offered more contemporary entertainment options. Santa's Land closed in 2006, ending a 40-year run that was, by the standards of independently operated year-round Christmas theme parks in the mountains, a respectable tenure. The site has been proposed for various redevelopment purposes since the closure. The Cherokee area around it has undergone significant economic and cultural change driven by the expansion of Harrah's Cherokee Casino, which opened in 1997 and has been expanded multiple times since, transforming the Cherokee economy in ways that a Christmas theme park could not have anticipated. Number 11. Rainbow Springs, Dunalon, Florida. Rainbow Springs is included on this list with a specific caveat. The Natural Springs attraction still exists as Rainbow Springs State Park in Dunalon, Florida, but the commercial attraction that operated at the site from 1937 through 1974, with its underwater viewing facility, glass-bottom boats, trained animals, botanical gardens, and the elaborately staged nature presentations that characterized mid-century Florida Springs attractions, is genuinely gone. The commercial Rainbow Springs attraction was one of several competing springs-based tourist operations in Central Florida during the mid-20th century, before Walt Disney World opened in October 1971 and fundamentally restructured who was visiting Florida and what they expected to do while there. The pattern repeated itself across multiple Florida Springs attractions: Silver Springs, which became a state park in 2013, Weeki Wachee Springs, still operating as a state park with its mermaid shows, and Rainbow Springs itself, all of which were commercial operations that could not compete with the scale and marketing resources of the Disney era. The commercial Rainbow Springs operation closed in 1974. The site was eventually acquired by the state of Florida and opened as Rainbow Springs State Park, which now manages the natural springs and the surrounding natural area. The underwater viewing platforms, the trained animals, and the theatrical presentations of the commercial era are gone, replaced by swimming, kayaking, and the quieter appreciation of a first-magnitude spring that produces an average of approximately 630 million gallons of water daily. Number 10. Mystery Hill, various locations. Mystery Hill, the specific attraction name, was used by multiple independently operated roadside mystery spots across the United States, including locations in North Carolina, Ohio, Michigan, and other states, was a category of attraction that relied on a specific optical illusion to charge admission, the mystery spot concept. A small structure built at a significant angle on a hillside, creating an environment where balls appear to roll uphill, water appears to flow upward, and standing humans appear to tilt at impossible angles relative to the ground. The optical illusion works because the human perception of level relies primarily on visual cues from the surrounding environment rather than on gravitational sensation. When the entire visible environment is tilted at a consistent angle, the floor, the walls, the ceiling, the exterior, the brain recalibrates its sense of level to match the surrounding visual context, causing the actual gravitational vertical to appear tilted. It is a consistent, well-documented perceptual phenomenon, and it is genuinely disorienting the first time you experience it. Mystery spots operated throughout the mid-20th century roadside era as reliable draw. The experience was genuinely strange enough that word of mouth kept attendance adequate. Several original mystery spots remain in operation. The mystery spot in Santa Cruz, California, opened 1940, and Confusion Hill in Piercy, California are among the surviving examples. The version that disappeared were the many independently operated Mystery Hill imitations that lacked the original site's longevity and the identity associated with a specific regional location. They closed as their local travel economies changed, and the empty, tilted shacks they left behind were not worth preserving. Number 9. Clark's Trading Post, Lincoln, New Hampshire. Partially, Clark's Trading Post in Lincoln, New Hampshire, is actually a survivor. It has been operating continuously since 1928 and remains in business in the 21st century, making it one of the longer-running roadside attractions in American history. The reason it appears on this list is that significant portions of the original attraction have disappeared, been demolished, or been replaced, and the Clark's Trading Post of 2024 is a substantially different product from the Clark's Trading Post of 1960. The bear shows that made Clark's famous, trained bears performing on stages for audiences, were a central feature of the original attraction and were part of the traveling bear act tradition that its founders, the Clark family, brought to the Lincoln location after operating circus bear acts. The relationship between roadside attraction bear shows and modern understanding of animal welfare has evolved significantly, and the nature of the animal shows at Clark's has changed accordingly over the decades. The original buildings, mechanical rides, and infrastructure from the mid-20th century peak have been gradually replaced. What has disappeared from Clark's is not the attraction itself, but the specific mid-century roadside vernacular that made the original Clark's a document of its era. The hand-painted signs, the original mechanical rides, the trained bear show in its original form. The attraction that replaced those elements is commercially viable in ways the original would not be, but it is not the same attraction that the older photographs document. Number 8. Ye Old Mill, Watkins Glen, New York, and similar. The Old Mill water ride concept, a slow boat ride through an enclosed building with mechanical animated displays, lit in the darkness of a fabricated cavern or mill building, was one of the most widely replicated roadside attraction formats of the mid-20th century. Ye Old Mill at Watkins Glen in New York was one of the better-known regional examples, operating for decades as a fixture of the Watkins Glen tourism corridor before eventually closing. The format traced back to the earliest dark ride concept, mechanical figures moving in darkness, triggered by the passage of a boat or vehicle through a track system, and the technology was simple enough to be replicated at regional and local scale throughout the amusement industry. Mill pond water courses, ghost train buildings, and dark rides of this type appeared in regional parks and roadside attractions from the 1920s through the 1970s. The attractions of this type that survived tended to survive because they were attached to larger parks, with the capital to maintain and update them. The standalone Ye Old Mill and similar isolated dark ride attractions closed as maintenance costs exceeded revenue as the regional tourism economies that supported them evolved, and as the audience expectation for entertainment production quality rose faster than the attraction's ability to keep pace. What closed was not the concept. Dark rides remained popular at major parks, but the specific low-budget regional variation that constituted the roadside version of the format. Number 7. Ponce de Leon Springs, Defuniak Springs, Florida. The natural spring attractions of Florida represent a category of roadside attraction whose commercial versions have nearly entirely disappeared, with the springs themselves surviving as state parks after the commercial operations became economically non-viable. Ponce de Leon Springs, a first-magnitude spring in Holmes County, Florida, was the site of a commercial tourist attraction that operated in the pre-Disney era of Florida tourism, when the spring's natural visual quality and the mythology of the Fountain of Youth legend associated with the Spanish explorer were sufficient draws for traveling Americans. Ponce de Leon himself probably never visited this specific spring. The Fountain of Youth mythology that attached to Florida springs generally is more legend than documented history, but the marketing opportunity the name provided was obvious and was used. The commercial attraction at the spring offered swimming, picnicking, and the standard amenities of a mid-century springs resort. The physical features of the spring, the clarity of the water, the blue-green color produced by the dissolution of limestone minerals, the constant temperature of approximately 68 degrees Fahrenheit year-round were genuinely beautiful and required no fabrication. The commercial operation closed, and the site became Ponce de Leon Springs State Park, managed by the Florida Division of Recreation and Parks. The state park experience is more genuine to the natural feature than the commercial operation was. But the roadside commercial attraction that made the spring a named destination along the route through the Florida Panhandle has disappeared into the state park designation. Number 6. Circus World Museum, Baraboo, Wisconsin. The Circus World Museum in Baraboo, Wisconsin is another entry that requires a precision caveat. It still exists as a museum institution. What completely disappeared is the full-scale operational attraction it was in its mid-20th century prime, when Baraboo was simultaneously the home of the Ringling Brothers Winter Headquarters from 1884 through 1918 and an active circus history museum with live performances, parade wagons, circus acts, and the full theatrical production of a genuine circus experience. Baraboo's claim to circus history is legitimate. The Ringling Brothers, the 5 Ringling Brothers originally from Iowa, established their circus winter quarters in Baraboo in 1884 and operated from there for over 3 decades, making Baraboo one of the most important circus centers in American history. The physical infrastructure of the Ringling operation, barns, training facilities, and warehouse buildings, was preserved and became the basis for the Circus World Museum when the Wisconsin Historical Society took ownership in 1954. The museum operated with live circus performances through the latter decades of the 20th century and into the 2000s. The operational economics of running live circus performances, the liability, the performer costs, the animal care requirements eventually proved incompatible with museum-scale funding. The attraction has transitioned more fully toward a historical and archival operation. The spectacular vintage parade wagon collection remains and is genuinely significant as a physical archive of American circus history, but the operational circus show that was the original draw for most visitors has substantially diminished. Number 5. Frontier Town, North Hudson, New York. Frontier Town was a Western-themed amusement park in the Adirondacks of upstate New York, about 50 miles south of the Canadian border, that opened in 1952 and operated for nearly half a century before closing in 1998. At its peak in the 1950s and 1960s, when the Western genre was at its height in American popular culture through television and film, Frontier Town offered stagecoach rides, staged gunfights, panning for gold, and the complete Western town experience with live-action performance elements that audiences found genuinely entertaining. The park's founder, Harold Balestier, built Frontier Town on the premise that the Western settings beloved by American audiences in their living rooms were worth experiencing physically. And in the mid-century context of road trip family travel and the availability of the Adirondack Mountains as a summer destination, the premise worked. The park expanded through the 1960s and maintained strong attendance through the period when Westerns were a staple of American entertainment. The problem, which eventually proved terminal, was structural. Frontier Town's appeal was entirely dependent on the cultural relevance of the Western genre, and the Western genre declined sharply in American popular culture from its 1960s peak. The Western television shows that had defined American family entertainment in the 1950s, Gunsmoke, Bonanza, The Lone Ranger, were replaced by other programming. Western films went from cultural mainstream to genre specialty, and Frontier Town, without the cultural context that made its theme resonate with audiences, was just a collection of old buildings and staged performances in the Adirondacks. The park closed in 1998. The Frontier Town site has been repurposed in various ways since. It now operates as a campground, and the specific structures and theatrical apparatus of the original park have been demolished or repurposed. The name Frontier Town survives on the campground signage as a remnant of what the site once was. Number 4. Land of Oz, Beech Mountain, North Carolina. Land of Oz was a theme park built on the summit of Beech Mountain in western North Carolina, opening in June 1970, designed around the story and visual elements of the wonderful Wizard of Oz. The developer, Grover Robbins Jr., collaborated with Harper Goff, who had worked as a designer on the original 1939 MGM film, to create a park that invited visitors to walk through a recreation of the Oz narrative, entering through Dorothy's farmhouse in Kansas and following the yellow brick road through the various story settings. The park's concept was ambitious and the setting extraordinary. At approximately 5,500 feet elevation on a ski mountain, the park offered an atmosphere that genuinely differentiated it from comparable attractions. But the business model was challenged from the start. The seasonal mountain location limited the operating window. The elevation weather was unpredictable. A fire in 1975 destroyed a significant portion of the park's costume and prop inventory. And the intellectual property situation, the MGM film's iconic visual elements were licensed separately from the L. Frank Baum public domain novels, created complications for the park's use of the most recognizable Oz imagery. The park closed to regular operations in 1980 after a decade. It has been operated as an annual fall event, Autumn at Oz, since 1991, and has held special occasional events. But the daily operational theme park that opened in 1970 is definitively gone. The yellow brick road and some original structures remain on the mountain in various states of preservation. The specific quality of the abandoned Land of Oz, the theatrical infrastructure of a Wizard of Oz theme park sitting open to the mountain weather, has attracted significant attention in the urban exploration and photography communities. As architectural and tourism historian Catherine Braund described the broader category of failed roadside attractions, these parks were built by people who genuinely believed in what they were doing. And that sincerity is often what makes the ruins feel sadder than the ruins of things built cynically for profit. Land of Oz is one of the more literal examples of that observation. Number 3. Enchanted Forest, Turner, Oregon. The Enchanted Forest in Turner, Oregon is technically a survivor. It has been operating since 1971 and is maintained by the Tofty family who built it. But the original Enchanted Forest of the 1971 opening was a different artifact than the commercial operation that is continued into the 21st century, and the specific handcrafted fairy tale storybook world that Roger Tofty spent years building before the park opened is a distinct cultural object from the commercial additions that followed. Roger Toft, a creative director who had worked in advertising, spent 7 years building the Enchanted Forest by hand before it opened in 1971, constructing fairy tale buildings and figures from the classic storybook canon, Alice in Wonderland, Hansel and Gretel, Snow White, and Old MacDonald's Farm. The original park was a handcrafted artifact rather than a commercial entertainment product, and it opened with essentially no rides and no commercial entertainment infrastructure. Just the built storybook world Tofte had created himself. The commercial additions came later: the haunted house, the log flume ride, the ice mountain bobsled ride, and the other attractions that a paying audience expected from a theme park experience. These additions funded the continued operation of the park, but changed its nature from the handcrafted original to something more like a conventional regional amusement operation. What has disappeared is not the Enchanted Forest itself, but the specific purity of the original 1971 handcrafted storybook installation, the moment when a creative professional's personal project existed before it became a commercial product. That moment, and the artifact it produced, is genuinely gone, even though some of the physical fabric of the original park survives within the commercial operation. Number 2, Joyland Amusement Park, Wichita, Kansas. Joyland Amusement Park in Wichita, Kansas, opened in 1949 and operated for over 50 years, closing in 2004. At its peak, Joyland was the primary regional amusement park for South Central Kansas and featured a collection of vintage amusement rides, including the Whip, a classic 1940s-era ride, a carousel, the Sooner Schooner Dark Ride, and the roller coaster, the park's signature wooden coaster, which was the source of significant affection among Wichita residents and regional visitors who grew up riding it. The closure in 2004 was the result of declining attendance, aging infrastructure that required more maintenance investment than the revenue supported, and the general condition of a regional amusement park competing for discretionary entertainment spending with larger regional and national alternatives. The specific Joyland story is a template for dozens of similar regional parks that operated across the Midwest and South through the mid-20th century and closed in the 1990s and 2000s as the economics of operating vintage amusement infrastructure without the capital base of a large park company became unsustainable. The physical infrastructure of Joyland, the buildings, the ride structures, and most significantly the wooden roller coaster, remained on the property for years after the closure, deteriorating gradually. The roller coaster structure, which the manufacturer Spillman Engineering had originally built in 1948 for another park before its relocation to Joyland, continued to attract the attention of coaster enthusiasts and preservation advocates who periodically proposed various rescue and restoration scenarios. None reached fruition. The ride and the park structures deteriorated to the point where demolition became the only viable option. Joyland has been demolished. Number 1, Pacific Ocean Park, Santa Monica and Ocean Park, California. Pacific Ocean Park, known universally as POP, was a pier-based amusement park in the Ocean Park neighborhood of Santa Monica, California, that opened in August 1958 as one of the most ambitious amusement attractions in American history, and lasted less than a decade before closing and eventually being demolished, leaving behind a legacy that has outlasted the attraction itself by decades. The park was built on the existing Ocean Park Pier, a structure that had hosted various amusements since the early 20th century and was reimagined in the late 1950s as a competitor to Disneyland, which had opened in Anaheim in July 1955 and was demonstrating what a themed, immersive amusement experience could look like. POP was backed by CBS and the General Development Corporation, and it featured themed sections including the Sea Circus, a world beneath the sea area, the Flight to Mars attraction, an underwater bar, and a fish and chips restaurant that claimed, accurately, to sit over the Pacific Ocean. The park attracted over 1 million visitors in its first year of operation and was genuinely innovative in its approach to themed entertainment in a coastal setting. The problems developed quickly and proved insurmountable. Maintenance of a salt-air ocean pier environment is expensive in ways that inland parks do not face. The thematic concept was more expensive to execute than the business plan had accounted for. Competition from Disneyland, which was substantially better funded and had a more coherent long-term development vision, kept Pop in a permanent disadvantageous comparison. The park closed in October 1967. What remained of the POP Pier was left standing for years before being demolished in stages through the 1970s. The last physical remnants were removed in 1974. In the years between the closure and the demolition, the pier became one of the more celebrated ruins in California, an abandoned ocean pier with deteriorating themed structures, inhabited by local youth and documented by photographers who captured the specific atmosphere of a mid-century amusement infrastructure being reclaimed by salt air and neglect. The legacy of Pop is out of proportion to its operational lifespan. The park's imagery, the mid-century optimism of its design, the melancholy of its abandonment, the specific California seaside location has made it a persistent reference point in California cultural history. Books have been written about it. The Beach Boys rehearsed in the area while the park was operational. The documentation of the abandoned pier became a specific genre of California photography. For a park that operated for less than 10 years, Pacific Ocean Park left a remarkably long shadow. 15 attractions, some closed by economics, some by changing tastes, some by the simple passage of time through a business model that never fully worked. The roadside attraction era they represent depended on a specific combination of road travel, limited entertainment alternatives, and audiences willing to stop and pay for experiences that ranged from genuinely remarkable to aggressively mediocre. The interstate highway system, the television, and eventually the smartphone collectively made the conditions that sustained these attractions less available, and the attractions themselves mostly disappeared without anyone formally deciding to end them. These are the 15 forgotten roadside attractions that completely disappeared, and their absence is its own kind of record. Hit that like button and subscribe. More content like this coming.